Last weekend, we attended an ultralight fly-in at Hodges Field, a beautiful grass strip in Georgia. Dana was invited to deliver a seminar on ultralight training and safety, which you will see here in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to share with you the official video press release for the event, which was organized by ultralight gurus Mark Murray and Brian Wallstrom.
The ultralight fly-in of the century. All right, standing out here at Mac Hodges Field, which they just call Hodges Field in Andersonville, Georgia. Really exciting event happening in October, and I want to invite every single one of you out here on the grass, which I think this is Bermuda grass.
Well, October 2 through 4, that's Thursday through Saturday. This is it, a beautiful field. We want as many ultralights, light planes as we can get here. We really want this to be an event that attracts the original single seat ultralights that a lot like you used to see at the 80s and 90s fly-ins. Two-seat aircraft that are ultralight-like are welcome, and actually all aircraft are welcome. If you can land on this field, you're welcome.
It's 1,400 feet. It's plenty wide, probably 300 foot wide, and we have a north-south runway as well as an east-west runway. The north-south runway is probably about 1,000 feet, and the east-west is about 1,400. Added hookups over the years, and we've got over 60 RV hookups.
So, yeah, there's so much Bermuda grass here. You'd think that Mac grew up on a golf course or something like that. Like, it's not just the runway. Like, the entire place is this Bermuda grass he's talking about. So it's really, I want to say, a privilege to be able to fly off this field, because it is nearly, like, it is. It's perfectly manicured.
We're planning bomb drops, spot landings, torpedo runs. We'll have a fly mark, so if you have something that you want to sell for a small 10% commission, you can sell your aircraft related items here at the fly mark. And we also plan on seminars every night.
As far as to just clarify for everybody, it's free to fly in, but we're going to be having the competitions, and it's an entry fee for those. And what does that look like?
All right, so if you show up, whether you drive in or you fly in, there's no fee. If you want to compete, there's a $20 fee for all the competitions, just a one-time fee for all competitions. Vendors have no fees this first year. We want as many vendors here as possible. We already had about 3 or 4 commit, and so no fee for vendors. There is the camping fee, which is $10 to $40 depending on which style, which type camp style you need, and that's pretty much it. While there's no fee to attend, if you're going to fly and enjoy the area, we just ask for a small donation to help. So make it so Mac can continue to do this for several more years.
Yeah, we get this built up. This is the first event ever. We hope to do this this is the launch of many years to come of hosting this event here. This is your call to action right now, as you are personally invited to show up on the grass here at Hodges Field. October 2nd through the 4th, plan to camp out and get to know everyone here that shares your passion for aviation. In partnership with the Experimental Aircraft Channel.
So this is Hodges Field in Georgia. There's Dana. Bunch of people here hanging out, camping. I love their windsock. It's an actual airplane. I don't know why all airports don't do that. It makes total sense. You just look at which way the airplane is pointed, and you say, okay, that's the way I should land. It's brilliant. So it's a little windy out here this morning, but the owner of the strip is giving it a go in his Legal Eagle. Nice job, buddy.
We did Kokomo, and after we left Kokomo, we found out later that it was one of those air-cooled, fan-assisted air-cooled 503s, a little Delta on the fan. So that's something from we got it back in Kokomo, and we got First of all, I want to thank Mac Hodges. I don't know where Mac is Mac around. I want to thank Mac Hodges and everybody else who was involved, and I don't know who you are, for putting this thing together. This is really cool. I think everybody will kind of agreed with me on that one. Hopefully this will be an annual event. I think that's the plan anyway. And I'd like to recognize a couple of folks here. First of all, why are we here? What are we doing here? And what can we do to keep this thing going and growing, I should say. And I want to recognize Brian and Katie Wallstrom. Brian, as most of you know, is with Experimental Aircraft Channel. A gentleman I just discovered about a month ago, John Jernigan. Where's John? There's John. John is with Aviation Adventure Boys. A little bit of background. I started flying back in the late 80s as a student pilot. I got my private in 1990. And I took my first ride in an ultralight. It was actually what would have been considered back then if they had a light sport aircraft. It was a Max Air Drifter, if you're familiar with that one. And I was just totally blown away by how much fun it was. And wasn't long after that, one of my neighbors had a weed hopper for sale for $1,200. And long story short, I ended up buying that. And when I say, I'm not kidding, when I say the first hour I flew that weed hopper, I had $1,200 worth of fun. I mean, it was just that much fun. I used to chase deer through the cornfields of Wisconsin on that weed hopper, and they would outrun me. I'm not kidding. And it was kind of like the coyote and the Roadrunner. You know, the coyote in the old cartoons back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, he'd catch up to the coyote, and the coyote would look at him and stick his tongue out, and he was gone. Well, I was the coyote and the weed hopper, and the deer were the Roadrunner. But anyway, I then went on to get my flight instructor certificate and started instructing full-time back in early 2002. And for most of the years since, I've been a career instructor. I met Meredith in 2010, and we got married, and she was already instructing in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where I met her, and we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and started flight school. So we've been operating a flight school down there for literally just a few weeks over 12 years now. And we do primarily private pilot training, so a lot of instrument, a lot of commercial and CFI, but we really cater, our bread and butter really is the learn to fly guys, the guys that just want to fly for fun. I have done ultralight training. I'm not currently doing it. That's where Mark Murray comes in. We'll talk about Mark here in a minute. But I really love this end of aviation. And to me, it's like the greatest paradox in my life is the most fun flying is the least expensive. Now, least expensive, as you all know, it's a relative term, right? But there's really most of you know this, there's really no less expensive way to get into flying than this end of aviation, so it's kind of neat. But that comes with some pitfalls, and that's some of the stuff we want to cover today. Anybody here teach themselves how to fly an ultralight without any help? So we got a gentleman down here. Congratulations for surviving that. Kind of scary, but I know there's a lot of guys that have done it. I don't recommend it, obviously. But, it makes me cringe when I see online on Facebook or whatever, guys are like, well, the number one question, let me back up a minute. The number one question in the ultralight world and the sport pilot world as well, but let's just talk part 103 for now. What do you think the number one question we see in the part 103 world is? Their question, where can I get training? Exactly. Bad news, there aren't a whole lot of places, and I talk to guys because they still call me. I'm still on the EAA site as being an ultralight instructor. And I said, look, you're going to have to travel. And this is true as well if you're going to get a private in a Piper or a Cessna or whatever. A lot of people have to travel because there's not a flight school, especially if you live in a rural area. And so what I tell these guys is, look, you need to travel as much of a pain as it is to travel and get training. Your life depends on it. We can't all be the guy who teaches them how to fly, teaches himself how to fly successfully. When I get that question, I really kind of send people to three different spots. One is Michigan Ultralight Association. club, which is Rick Hayes and John. Where's Rick? They're in Flint, Michigan. You've got Mark Murray, who's in Dawson, Georgia, with a guy down in South Lakeland, Ariel Grafals. There's Captain Drake's way out in Oregon. Anybody have any idea what the accident rate is for Part 103? We really don't know for sure, because here's how the typical accident investigation happens. So the ultralight goes down and crashes. The local police are called. They come out to the scene and they're like, okay, well, we got to call the FAA. So they call the FAA, and the FAA guy says, what's the tail number? Oh, there isn't one. Oh, how many seats does it have? Let me look over there. It's got one seat. That's an ultralight. We're not interested. That's what happens with the investigation. We had been doing this scenario. It's basically what AQP is, stands for Advanced Qualification Program. And what it is it's scenario-based training that the airlines do, and that we adopted years before you even heard the term. Don't be surprised when your engine quits on takeoff. Be surprised when it doesn't quit on takeoff, right? You know what I mean by that? Literally, and this sounds kind of silly, but it's the truth. When I take off in an airplane with a student, or by myself, or Meredith and I are flying, and she'll tell you the same thing, we literally say to ourselves, this is the departure where we're going to have an engine failure. So what are we going to do now? How high do I need to be before I can turn around and make it back to the runway I departed from? Almost certainly with a tailwind now, because we know if there's any wind at all, we're going to take off into the wind. What am I going to do if I lose an engine up at, let's say, 3,000 feet, right? So what we teach is, before we take off, we have a predetermined altitude. And where I'm going with this is, we want everybody here, if you're flying, if you haven't already adopted this mentality, to adopt this mentality. What is my hard deck for a minimum altitude for turning this airplane that I'm flying back around and landing on the runway? Or if I don't have that altitude, what are my options straight ahead? They're obviously going to change based on where you are. I was noticing today, look what you have here off the departure into this runway. Got a cotton field. It's a pretty good place to put an airplane down, right? Where Meredith and I have our flight school in Jacksonville at the Craig Airport, there's really not a whole lot off the departure into the runways. There's some marsh, which is okay, and there's some medians between some pretty busy highways. But one of the first things we did when we moved down there was we looked at an aerial view on Google Earth to see what option did we have. And that's changed in the 12 years we've been there. Not only is it environmentally dependent, it's also aircraft dependent. So you guys that are flying Part 103 or even light sport, high drag, low inertia aircraft, how many feet do you need to be above ground level to execute the 180, which is really more than a 180. It's a 180 and then angling back for the runway. How high off the ground do you need to be to execute that 180 and land that airplane? Okay, let's say a standard day. You're right. It depends on, air density, of course, how heavily you're loaded, what make and model, but just in round terms, if you thought about this when you take off, what is your personal minimum for, all right, if I lose an engine, I'm gonna come back to the runway? 500 feet. 900, okay? Well, again, it depends on the airplane, right? You really should kind of have that in the back of your mind. Again, don't be surprised when your engine quits. Be surprised when it doesn't quit. Expect that engine to fail on every takeoff. What's the most critical phase of any flight? It's takeoff, right? Followed by landing, because those are the two times you're near the ground. You're not going to wreck your airplane in the middle of the air. It's going to be down here where the ground is real hard, right? What about if we have a crosswind and we lose an engine down low? Does it matter which way we turn? Yes. It does. Which way should we turn? Turn into the wind. Your turn radius is going to be smaller. So these are the things we think about when we're doing the AQP training, right? And when Meredith and I fly our Sport Cub, she recites every time, even though we've done it
hundreds of times, she's verbalizing, right? If I lose an engine on the takeoff roll, this is what I'm going to do. If I lose an engine down low, this is where I'm going to go off of this runway. And again, it's going to change with the runways, change with the environment. But that's something that you really want to think about and practice. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we teach landing with a simulator or a real engine out when we have enough altitude to really pick a pretty good place to land. But how do we set that up? We've all probably seen where somebody had an engine failure and they were within glide distance of a decent place to land, maybe a runway, maybe a field, but they either undershot or overshot the field, right? So there's several different techniques for bringing that airplane down and getting it to that runway. And ours is obviously by no means the only one, but I feel the best one, and I'll tell you why. And this is, there's a lot of technique to flying, right? Some people like to, if you have flaps, to land with the flaps up, all the way up, all the way down, somewhere in the middle. Some people like to come in a little faster, some people like to come in a little slower. We don't argue technique at our flight school, as long as the technique covers three things. It's legal, it's within the limitations of the airplane, and it's safe, right? So other than that, we don't argue technique. But this is the one technique that we insist that the other 6 instructors at our flight school, besides Meredith and I insist that they teach this technique because I don't want 8 different instructors teaching 8 different techniques, and then the students don't really get proficient or really good at any of them. And what that is we teach what we call A, B, C, and D. It's kind of a set of items that we do when you lose an engine. So you lose an engine up at altitude, you've got enough altitude to glide to a decent spot. What's the first thing we do when we lose an engine? A, right? Airspeed. What's our best glide speed? Now, do we pitch for best glide speed looking at the airspeed indicator? You might. But let me tell you why that's not a good idea. We're going to fine tune with the airspeed indicator, but we really want to know what that pitch angle looks like, right? And if you don't know this, next time you're flying, go up and figure it out. Yeah, you're not going to waste a lot of time using the airspeed indicator to pitch for best glide, but we're really teaching a look over the nose. Where's that best glide airspeed, and then we're going to fine tune it. So what about B? Anybody know what B is? A is airspeed. I want to pitch for that best glide speed and start heading for B, best place to land. All right, where's my best option? Go with the sure thing. If you think you might be able to make it to that runway over there, but you can certainly make it to this cotton field over here, just head for the cotton field. What about C? Okay, we're gonna move that to D, which is declare. C is my checklist, okay? So airspeed, A, B, C, D, airspeed, best place to land, checklist, and in the Cessnas, and I don't know, they kind of have their own checklist, but in the Cessnas and the Pipers and most certified aircraft, there's an engine failure in flight checklist, and then there's a forced landing checklist, right? So we're going to probably, if the restart checklist doesn't work, we're going to go to that forced landing checklist. And make sure we give ourselves the best shot at restarting that engine. And then D is your communicate, but I call it declare. If there's somebody to talk to, whether it's ATC, emergency frequency, if you have a radio on 121.5, let somebody know you're going down. So if you have a bad ending to your approach and landing, somebody knows to come get you, right? So that's what we teach. Now, as far as how we do this, and this is probably one of the bullet points for the little talk we're doing here today. The technique that we teach, okay, and again, this is if you have enough altitude to get to the environment, to the runway or the field or whatever. And I'm going to use this table as an example. So, my edge of the table is the runway. All right, we take off, and as far as the traffic pattern goes, we have crosswind, downwind, base, and final, right? So the technique that we teach is pitch for best glide, find your place to land, and we teach all of our students, make a beeline, no matter where you are, make a beeline for the departure end of that traffic pattern, for the departure end of the runway, okay? So the wind's blowing this way, this is me on short final right here, this is the departure end of the runway. We're going to circle down here, And it's probably going to be a little bit higher with an ultralight because of the higher drag and lower inertia. But in a certified aircraft, we teach 1,500 feet. I'm going to say from my experience with the Weed Hopper and the Breeze 2 that we fly now on amphibs, probably going to be 2,000 feet. You're going to circle down, if you have the luxury of altitude, circle down to whatever your predetermined altitude is. I'd say to start off with, if you guys want to practice this in your airplane, about 2,000 feet, and then don't circle down any further. Once you get to that altitude, turn crosswind, then fly a downwind at your normal offset to the runway, with the goal of being the numbers at pattern altitude. And this goes back to why I feel like this is the best technique for us to teach, because when you enter the pattern, assuming you're not doing a straight in or you're doing a basic final approach to the runway, when you're in the pattern, where are we when we're being the numbers on the downwind? We're at pattern altitude, aren't we? So now it's a simple matter, because I mean anybody can circle down to 1,500 or 2,000 feet at the departure of the runway. That just doesn't take a whole lot of skill, let's face it. But when you get to that downwind and now you're being the numbers at pattern altitude, this is where you kind of got to know what you're doing, right? Because you don't want to end up short, especially if there's trees or power lines, and you don't want to end up long and going off the end of the runway. So what you can do is when you're out there flying, in the pattern, okay, the industry as pretty much as a standard, at least most of the time, we teach, okay, being the numbers, if we have a carbureted engine, we're going to put the carb heat on. And I know you guys don't have carb heat in the ultralights, a lot of them, but just for argument's sake, in the Cessnas and the Pipers and most of the common training aircraft, carb heat's going to come on, throttle's going to come back to what? For you guys that train for the private, commercial, what do they teach you? 1,500 RPM, carb heat on, 1,500 RPM, and then make sure we're in the wide arc. We're going to, below VFE, we're going to put 10 degrees of flaps down. We're going to hit our 45. We're going to get on base. We're going to put in 20 degrees. So we fly like robots, right? And what I mean by that is we're not always going to do 10 degrees of flaps here, 20 degrees on base, and 30 on final. It depends on wind, depends on loading and all that. But point being is, when you're out there flying, I would encourage you to do this. Pull your power to idle and beam the numbers, and see if you make it back to the runway. And if you don't, obviously add power. You don't want to land off field. But ask yourself, what happened there? Why, when I pulled my power to idle, did I not make it back to the runway? Well, yesterday I tried this and it worked, but today it didn't work, and I didn't do anything differently. Oh, I got a 15-knot headwind on final. We're coming in with no wind in whatever configuration, and we're gliding like this. And then tomorrow, with a 20-knot headwind, same configuration, what's going to happen? I'm doing this, right? So you may have to change this up. But what it allows you to do, and the reason I like this technique is because, and this is the truth, when I fly, I don't fly by myself a whole lot. Usually when I'm flying for fun, if I'm not with a student, I'm in the back seat of the Cub and Meredith's flying, so I'm just back there kind of sightseeing. But when I fly and I'm at the controls, without exception, if the controllers, because we're at a very busy towered field, which is one of the reasons we got out of the ultralight training business, because it's just a horrible field for teaching people how to fly ultralights. 100% of the time, when I am at the controls and I'm not extended downwind either by the control tower, or I have to extend because I'm at a non-towered field following a Learjet or a King Air or a 3-mile final, that power comes to idle right there being the numbers. Because every time you're on the downwind, and you don't have to extend for whatever reason, it's an opportunity to practice this last 1,000 feet down to the runway. And Meredith had 3 engine failures. I've had 4. I had a cylinder blow apart on me at low altitude, flying a photographer up in Chicago years ago, and limped it back to the airport. But I was able to, on the engine failures that I had, I was able to employ this technique, and it pretty much kept me alive. It's an opportunity to practice that, and I encourage you to do that pretty much every time you fly, or at least fairly often. Most of us will never see an engine out. If you don't run that airplane out of fuel, you'll probably never see an engine failure. But just because we probably won't see an engine failure doesn't mean we don't want to be ready for it. And I can tell you, with the 4 engine outs I've had, you can practice it all you want. When that engine quits and you know you've got a dead stick that airplane into landing, it's different than simulation. 3 accidents that students of mine had, and Meredith did a video on this. If you go on her YouTube channel, and it's titled, if you're interested in looking at it, it's entitled AQP 4 Ultralights. The first one was a guy who ordered an ultralight and waited a couple of years longer than he thought he was going to wait for this ultralight. So he was really anxious to go fly it. And I was training this gentleman. He had 450 hours, by the way. It was a private, might have been a commercial. I think it was a private. He had 450 hours of log flight time, but he hadn't flown in 40 years. So he contacted me about doing some training because he says, I'm going to get this ultralight, and it's, it's obviously on a single seat. And I'd kind of like to talk to you about it. And what he told me was, he said, well, I'm a private pilot. It's been a while since I've flown, but I've got 450 hours. So when I get the call that this thing's, because it's factory built, I'm going to fly it the roughly 75 miles home. And I said, that's not going to be a good idea. And he was, pretty much offended by that. He said, well, I'm a skydiver. I understand aerodynamics. I've got 450 hours. And I said, these things do not fly like anything you've ever flown, because I asked him if he'd ever flown anything, high drag, low inertia. He said, no. I said, that's a bad idea. So I did 3 flights with him in our Quicksilver. I had a Quicksilver 2S at the time. We had done 3 30-minute flights, 7 landings each flight, and he was getting to where he could do a pretty good landing. And I told him, I said, we got other stuff to do. We haven't done any simulated engine outs. I'm real big on those. We do a ton of those things at our flight school. Spin training we hadn't done, and I said, you're not ready to fly this thing yet. Just give me some more time with you in case something happens. And he went out on a Sunday morning, and he told me he was just going to do some crow hops, right? Or go out and taxi test it, even fiddle with the engine, breaking the engine in. And we have closed circuit cameras in our hangar. And it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. I get up and I eat breakfast, and I look at the camera, and he's in there pre-flighting his or pushing his airplane out of the hangar. So I'll go to the airport and see if he needs any help doing these little taxi tests or crow hops. 6:15, I roll into the airport, and he's up in the air. And I watched him fly for about 30 seconds. He disappeared behind the hangar, spun the airplane in, and was killed. His wife watched it happen. And interestingly enough, and again, I told him he wasn't ready to fly, but I don't know if he meant to go up or not. But last thing he said to his wife was, if this flight doesn't turn out well, I love you. The last thing he said to her. So, sounds like to me he intended to fly it, and it cost him his life. The second accident that's on this video was a student of mine in his own Ramses 12, and we had gone through all the ground training, all of the pre-solo training. He soloed on a beautiful day on the grass strip near Jacksonville, did 3 beautiful landings, and he was ecstatic. He was driving 4 hours from north in Georgia down to Jacksonville, train 2 or 3 days at a time and go home. So finally he solos and everything's good. The next day we started ground school for navigation and flight planning. And we were done with our 2-hour ground session, and he goes, well, can I solo again? I said, yeah, sure, you got solo endorphins, beautiful weather. Go ahead at it. So he takes off and he flies around the pattern once without landing, comes in and does a perfect landing, taxis back, takes off, flies around again, does 1 loop around the pattern. Then he comes in to land, and the guy who cuts the grass there was on the mower on the edge of the runway, and this gentleman was worried that the lawnmower might not clear the runway, so he decided to do a go-around at the approach into the runway, and he went about half throttle, climbed up to about 200 feet and turned crosswind really slow. And he disappeared behind our hangar, and I had a buddy of mine who had taken up in the breeze just because he just happened to be there doing a fun flight with me. And I looked over at him and said, man, he needs to add some more throttle, he's slow. Next thing I know, I hear this whoosh. He spun his airplane into an oak tree, and fortunately for him, the oak tree just kind of caught him like a safety net. And right before he finished going through the oak tree, the left wing caught on a branch, turned him sideways, so he was wing straight up and wing straight down. The right wing hits the ground, crushes in, and just set him down just like a safety net. He drove home that night. And he lacerated his thumb, a tendon in his thumb. So he had a little surgery in his thumb, but 30 feet in any direction, he's a dead man, right? Where I'm going with that was he didn't have a stall warning horn, and a lot of these aircraft don't have stall warning. So this is why it's so important. If you don't have whether you have a stall warning indicator or not, know how that airplane feels when you're getting ready to stall it, and how to get out of the spin. That video, if you watch it, the security camera actually shows him spinning into the oak tree. And then the last one was a guy who was doing really well. He weighed about 300 pounds, but unfortunately the breeze will lift him legally with me at like 190 pounds. He trained, was doing great. He had a Freebird. If you guys know what a Freebird is, it's a single seat, Part 103. He had a 503 engine. He'd owned it for years and finally had enough training. And long story short, he decided to fly it. I told him he was ready to fly it, and he picked a really horrible spot. Took off from behind this big distribution building at this industrial park, and I don't know, 100, 150 feet in the air, the engine quit. And he didn't have enough altitude to turn around, and all he had was trees in front of him. So he went through the trees and got all busted up. He was in the hospital for about 2 or 3 months, but he lived. So my point there is if you guys are training to fly for the first time, or you're already flying and you're feel like you want a little refresher on stalls, if you're going to practice stalls, obviously go way up there, but know how the spin occurs, what causes it, where it's most likely to happen, and how you get out of it. Because when you stall an airplane, if you're not perfectly coordinated, what happens? Well, you get a wing drop, right? And I think this is what happened to my first gentleman. When that wing drops, what's our instinct tell us to do? Crank those ailerons, right? Raise that wing up. But when you're stalled, when you're in a spin, one wing is stalled. If your left wing dropped, your left wing's stalled, the right wing's not fully stalled, you crank that stick or those ailerons or the yoke to the right, what's going to happen? You're going to make it worse, because you're not generating any lift with that wing, and all you're doing by cranking those ailerons the other way is you're just making it worse. So if you don't stall it, you can't spin it. So, get that training if you haven't gotten it, or if you haven't done it in a while, go back and get a refresher on that stuff. And, lastly, don't, if you can help it, can't always help it, but don't fly anywhere, and I do this with certified aircraft as well. Don't fly anywhere where if you lose an engine, you're in really bad shape, okay? And we do this routinely. We try not to, but we have all these regulations that we memorize to be private pilots and that we should memorize to fly anything. And one of them is the minimum altitude rule. And there's like 4 different sections, about where you are, whether you're over congested areas or uncongested areas, sparsely populated areas of water. My rule is, if I look down and I go, man, if I lose an engine here, I'm screwed. I don't want to be there. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Murray.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, Dana and I, we've talked very little except online, but as far as the flight engine failures, just listening, we're on the same wavelength.
All right.
Yeah, that was good to hear. I want to talk a little bit today about what the FAA coins as aviation decision making, ADM, which I remember as a teenager when I came across that, I'm like, and I was taking flight instruction and assessment, I was like, decision making? I just want to fly an airplane. What are they talking about? But one thing I've learned as a flight instructor is you can have the world's best stick and rudder pilot make some of the stupidest decisions. And it doesn't, and we're not we're not trying to speak bad of anyone or anything, but the point of that is sometimes it doesn't matter how good a pilot you are if you put yourself in situations where all of that skill is not going to help you out. So let's talk about what ADM really is, and let's talk about it in practical terms. So if you read some of the literature that FAA has about decision making, and they have a couple of things they call the DECIDE model, DECID, if that's spelled correctly. Anyhow, you're supposed to, in an actual, we're talking in-flight emergency. You're supposed to go through this acronym and try to remember what everything means. Well, what kind of emergencies are we talking about? You know, and we think like ultralights are like, well, what other emergency is there other than an engine failure? Well, and these are some real life scenarios I've seen. Flying a little too close to sunset, not making it back to your home field. It's dark, you can't see the ground. Fuel exhaustion for sure could be an emergency if your ground speed is way less than you thought it was going to be, so you're not going to actually make your destination. That can become an emergency because now you're faced with a forced landing that you weren't planning for. So it can happen. So what are some really practical things that all of us can use, simple practical things we can use when it comes to aviation decision making, making these in-the-moment decisions in flight? Because if you haven't experienced it, it is different. See, everything we're about to talk about here is happening. We're all calm and it's nice. We're sitting down and just enjoying ourselves. And those of you that experience this in flight, when all of a sudden you're faced with a situation that everything went from being fun and easy to critical, anxiety can go through the roof, panic can go through the roof. I mean, you can have a lot that you're dealing with, and it is a totally different environment. So what we need is, we need some little pointers, some little things to help us get through the next few moments to make it easy. And I was very fortunate to receive my flight instructor training under a guy who, everybody called him Mike Z down in Florida. And he spent a lot of time on ADM. And he gave me some pointers that I always try to share with anybody that has a listening ear, because it has helped me. So, decision making means that not just what decision you make at the moment, it means that you're monitoring the situation. It means that while you're flying, every so often you stop, pause, and say, where am I? How much fuel is on board? What is my altitude? Do I know where I am? Some basic stuff. And it sounds really basic, but that's one thing, especially if you're just cruising along and you're enjoying the flight. Sometimes you have to stop and say, okay, yeah, GPS says I'm here, but do I really know where I am? Is this the actual pond that I see, or is this the actual town I see on GPS? Do I know for a fact that I have another hour and a half of fuel on board? And once you get in the habit of that, what that does for you, it reinforces your situational awareness, as they say. What you're doing is you're monitoring the current situation. Because like my instructor taught me, there's only 3 variables. There's only 3 variables. And this is way easier than the DECIDE model that the FAA has. 3 variables. The flight is either going to plan as planned, the environment is better than you thought, or the conditions are better, so say in a case where you're not sure you're going to make it to your destination, but it turns out, hey, your ground speed is better than you planned for, great. What you're monitoring for are condition or situations deteriorating, ceilings dropping, visibility's dropping, ground speed's decreasing. And see, when you get in that mindset, I'm just going to every so often just check, hey, where am I? How's this going? That you pick up those problems way quicker. Now, this next thing I'm going to tell you, it sounds way too easy, but it really helps. What happens next is when you realize the situation has deteriorated, it's getting darker way sooner than you realize. Hey, I'm going to have to land on my grass strip in the dark. There's no lights. You know, what are my alternatives? The panic goes through the roof, or my engine is just, it's running, but it's just barely staying, keeping me in the air. What am I going to do next? For whatever reason, our brains were designed to throw us 100 options. And it's just going to come floating at you. I can do this, I can do that. And that's good, we need options. But the problem is the best option doesn't float to the top. That's what we want to have. We want that that best, safest option to float to the top, and there it is. To give you an example of this, I was test flying, actually it was this Challenger years ago, and I had put a couple hours on the engine, and I'm just kind of flying around the area. I'm about 20 to 30 miles from my home field, and there's nothing but tall pine trees between here, where I was at, and home field. And you know, like Dana was saying, you know, I'd fly usually, make sure I had something underneath me, so I'd kind of take not a straight route, but I'd follow the roads or whatever, make sure I had something underneath. So during this test flight, I advanced power wide open and to climb a little bit more, and the engine starts missing. So immediately I pull back down to cruise, and everything settles down, and I'm like, so immediately I start circling and thinking about my options. And what I realized at this point, my ADM method was working. What's the safest option? Well, there's a private strip right over here, and I know I can get there. And so I went direct to this little private strip that I knew well. But guess what? In the 5 minutes it took to get from where the mist started and that strip, the engine ran so good this week. It was running so good, and I'd actually been able to climb a few more 100 feet. And now I'm looking at home field, and I can actually barely on the horizon, I can see my home field across all those 20 miles of pine trees. It was a clear day. I'm like, wow, that's where home field is, and that's where my truck is, and that's where the hangar is, and that's where the tools are. I'm going to have to work on this thing, and that's where my tools are. You know, it's running so good. I just need to get across these pine trees. And I was reminded, pick the safest option. I'm circling a private runway, grass runway, that I had actually built at one time, me and another guy, so I kind of knew it kind of well. So I'm like, yeah, safest option is land right here, but man, if I land, my wife will have to pick me up. She'll have to drive me to the hangar. She's not going to like that. Yeah, I'm going to take off across these 20 miles of pine trees. And I was like, safest option, dummy. Safest option right here, land. You know, why risk it? I actually almost had to mentally slap myself. You know, this is done. So I landed, and of course called my wife. She picks me up, and I explained the situation to her. I said, you know, I actually thought about flying home field and not bothering you with this. And she's like, you are an idiot, aren't you? I lived to fly another day. Now, that's just one case. And what happened there, all of those options were coming at me. You know, yeah, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. But I remembered my flight instructor saying, choose the safest option. Force yourself to say, what's my safest option? The safest option is to be on the ground and deal with this, somewhere safe. Now, again, that sounds like the simplest advice you can hear, but in the heat of the moment, an actual emergency, that's what you need. You need to focus on the simplest and the clearest direction, and that's it. And that's really all I've got to share. That's just one little thing I like to share with all my students. Monitor, figure out what the situation is. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it improving? When you pick up on the deterioration of the environment or the deterioration of the situation, choose the safest option. The old adage is, it's better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than air wishing you're on the ground. So
great presentations, guys. Good talk. Good speakers. We need more good speakers in aviation. Just want to also mention, talking about training for a second. So on the tail end of that, you know, you've probably seen videos out there on YouTube and social media. I've produced them as well, talking about ultralight aviation, where no license required. It's a great title, it's a great headline. It's fact, right? You do not need a license to fly these, but by no means do I, or hopefully these other channels either, actually promote that, right? I would say how many people are actually flying ultralights here today? All right, and how many people are interested in flying ultralights very soon? Okay, good number here. So I would highly suggest before you sit your butt in any of these airplanes to go fly, that you get some transition training. Okay, it's not required to get an actual license, but it doesn't mean you just go out and fly one. Okay, get 5 or 10 hours in a very, very light aircraft to get the basics understanding, and then get with somebody that is very knowledgeable about these type of very ultralight aircraft before you just go and fly. All right, you don't know what you don't know, and that's, I think, the biggest thing.
One of the things you can do is you can get some training, and I recommend this if you're having a hard time finding a place like Mark's, or you need to travel to Mark, you need to travel to Rick's place up in Flint, Michigan, or down to South Lakeland. You can get basic training in a certified airplane, and then transition to this, which is again highly recommended because these aircraft fly differently because of the high drag, low inertia aspect of them. So to answer the question, what I would recommend is you may have to travel, go to a flight school that has a certified airplane and get comfortable in that airplane, and then you won't have, not to take away business from Mark and Rick and anybody else that's doing this, you won't have to travel as much and spend as many hours in that airplane. But the basics are the basics, right? No, they're not. Yeah, and I don't want anybody to misconstrue that. They're not going to act the same. But as far as what a stall is and what a spin is, yes, the characteristics are different. But we've done a lot of training with people that trained in the 150s and 152s, and then they went to a Mark Murray or to John up at Michigan Ultralight Association, and then learned how to fly, how these things handle. And the main thing is I almost never land my breeze at idle power, unless I'm teaching a simulated engine out. It's all about airspeed. Well, if you throttle back, and one of the videos that Meredith put up showed, we did a kind of a demo, and you can see the airspeed indicator where I'm flying level flight at probably about 4,000 RPM. There is a gear reduction airplane, so the props probably turning 2,300 RPM. And I pull a throttle to idle, and you can't even count to 5 before I go from 65 to 40 miles an hour. So it's all about airspeed and controllability, because the slower you're going, the less control authority you have. So when you come in with a Cessna, you throttle back, you can glide that thing down and land it. And you can do that with one of these, but your nose down attitude is much higher to maintain that airspeed.
That's great, yeah, that's what we, yeah. Yeah. We ain't done yet.
Rated at 195. I know it's